So my radiation treatment for recurrence of prostate cancer has begun. I'm on ADT. I've been doing research, talking to a lot of people, listening to a lot of people who are unhappy with this disease and really upset with what's happening to them. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but I wanted to make this video to bring everybody up to date on what's happening with me, but also address a lot of questions that have been coming up. So let's get started.
This podcast deals with prostate cancer, surgery, medication, and other medical topics. The host is a prostate cancer survivor who is recounting his experience with treatment. He is not a medical professional, and you should not use his commentary as medical advice. Please always consult a medical professional when learning about and understanding prostate cancer or any other disease.
It's time for me to add another addition to my podcast series. This will appear both in audio form in podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, but also on YouTube as well. And today's episode is to bring those of you up to date who have been following my journey with recurrence of prostate cancer, and also just address a number of questions that have been coming up over the Facebook channel from a lot of you that are newly diagnosed, that are a little concerned and worried about pre-surgery, the surgery itself, side effects, etc. So I'll get a little bit on that, but I'm going to try to keep this to about 20 minutes today and kind of two sections. The first section to tell everybody what's happening with my radiation treatments, which have started, and then address other things that have come up over the weeks. So let's start off with what's happening. I decided that when my PSA hit 0.40, that would be the point in time where I would seek radiation treatment. I had my prostate removed in 2015. That surgery went well. The side effects were minimal. I've been living a very happy and joyful life until then, but then my PSA started to rise. Anyway, two things I wanted to talk about in this particular part of this podcast. One of them was the continued use of ADT. In my case, I'm using Orgovyx, but you may be using Lupron. And then the actual start of radiation treatment, what that looks like, what the preparations for, what you do every day, what happens during the actual routine. So getting back to the ADT, and I did broadcast a few episodes on this. I'm using something called Orgovyx, and I'll show you what they look like. It's pill form. Okay. All right. Little pill. All right. And by the way, I'm broadcasting from a hotel in Knoxville because I am having my treatments away from my home, but there's a proton facility in Knoxville, Tennessee called the Thompson Proton Center, which is phenomenal. But as far as the ADT, when you're going to have radiation, whether it's for prostate cancer, the initial bout of it, or for recurrence, they want to put you on a testosterone deprivation hormone therapy. ADT stands for androgen deprivation therapy, but in essence, what we're doing is reducing testosterone to almost nothing. And the rationale there, and the science supports this, then all of us are terrified of ADT, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you drop your testosterone level before getting radiation, then whatever cancer cells are there, whether they're already out there measurable or are in microscopic forms, like a lot of recurrent prostate cancer is, the prostate cancer cells are much more receptive to the radiation when the testosterone is insignificant. So that's why that's important. But the two main methods that you hear a lot about, one is Lupron, where you get a shot. It lasts about 3 months, and you probably do that shot twice. So you're on ADT for about 6 months. Typically, 2 months before radiation, you typically have about 2 months of radiation, and then 2 months afterwards, you stay on this and then hope for the best. And, we all really do. Lupron is a shot. Orgovyx is a daily pill. I'm a big fan of Orgovyx simply because once you start taking it, it kicks in very, very quickly. And then when you stop taking Orgovyx, the effects start to diminish very quickly, or so they say. With Lupron, once you're let's say your second shot is finished and it's 3 months later, the effects of the Lupron can linger for months, even several months. But anyway, but the choice is yours. So spoke about this. Side effects I had mentioned prior. There's a laundry list of side effects when you get on an ADT. Everything from hot flashes to erectile dysfunction to complete loss of libido to putting on weight or diarrhea or fatigue or weak bones, all kinds of things like that. And I am past 6 weeks now. I'm into I think my 7th week of being on ADT. And as I mentioned in a different podcast, I do get, I don't want to call them hot flashes. I get warm from time to time, and it lasts a minute and it goes away, but it's nothing jarring. Sometimes at night you wake up and you open the covers because you get warm, but it's not horrific. Everything else, libido is, I would say libido is reduced dramatically, but I also think libido, part of it is mind over chemical. The chemistry, the testosterone in your body keeps libido alive. So when you see someone attractive, and this is kind of a man's thing, I think, they say, that, a man sort of sees sex with his eyes and a woman sees sex with her heart. But anyway, so prior to taking an ADT, if you saw somebody attractive and you kind of had that reaction, that sexual reaction, which is very typical, that goes away. Not entirely, but you sort of have to remind yourself that when you saw that woman or, that you really found attractive before, you have to convince yourself and say, yes, that woman is beautiful. I'm not throbbing at this point, but she's still beautiful. And so, libido is reduced, but the interesting thing is, for me at least, it has not disappeared. I just have to kind of coax it out. Same thing with erectile function. It's a lot more difficult, but it can be done. You just have to really focus on it. But other than that, fatigue, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm any more fatigued, but I had a lot of advice from a lot of you out there as to a way to negate the effects of ADT, and that is to exercise and to eat well. So I'm exercising at least 3 days a week, and I'm using, so you're going to hear different theories on what the best way to exercise is. I think the doctors concur that it's using weights. So if you get yourself a trainer or even a remote trainer that can sort of give you remote instructions. I have an app that I use when I'm not with my trainer, but training with weight, so that's your arms, your shoulders, your legs, your core, at least 3 times a week for about an hour. That really seems to have a profound effect on how well you react. And as I said, your testosterone, I did have labs. My testosterone it used to be 800. It's down to about 10, which is almost nothing. Your testicles, I sort of knew this, but when you rid your body of testosterone, your testicles shrink, I think half in size, and you notice it, but it's temporary, so it's one of those things. And as you can tell sort of by my mood, none of this has really got me down. These are all expected side effects, the end goal being getting rid of cancer for good. And this is my second chance to get rid of cancer for good. The surgery was the first opportunity. A lot of men, I think, is it 70% of men that have surgery, that's it for life. That's it, you're done. It never comes back. 30%, and don't quote me on these statistics, but I think they're somewhat accurate. In my case, I had a positive margin, so some of the cancer was close to the edge of the prostate, and when they removed it, there was some tissue left behind that over time, over 9 years, eventually sort of started to come back to life. So nothing is showing up on a PSMA scan, so they can't find or see the cancer, but they know it's there because of a PSA score. And the idea now is, well, it's microscopic. We believe it's still in the prostate bed. Let's do radiation and let's be done with it for good. But like I said, these side effects, they are what they are. This is the objective, is to get rid of it. So I want to shift now to talk a little bit about what the radiation process is like, especially the first couple of days. And a lot of men that I spoke to say that the ADT was the worst part of this whole exercise and that the radiation itself wasn't really so bad. What's kind of cool about radiation is when you're getting treated for it, you don't feel it. It's just like having an x-ray at your dentist's office or at the doctor's office. So I'm getting proton radiation, which is a more advanced way of applying radiation, but whether you do photon or IMRT or even CyberKnife, SBRT, which is what you would possibly have done if you still have your prostate. When you have recurrence, it's going to be IMRT, which is what they call photon radiation or proton radiation. I'm not going to get into the nuances, but other than that, when you walk into the center, when they're going to radiate your prostate bed, it's a very imprecise procedure, by the way. It's not like when you have a tumor and they radiate the tumor, they know exactly what they're going for. When it's recurrence especially, I'm not going to address so much radiation for prostate cancer, for the original, because they do radiate the prostate. When it's not there, there's just a field left over, and they know the cells are coming from somewhere, but they're not exactly sure 100%. So they do kind of cover the bed area as best they can. But there's areas around it, and so what they want to do is they want to make sure that they only radiate as much of an area as they need to. So there's some preparation that they do. So before you actually start radiation, you're going to go in for what they call a simulation, usually 4 weeks before, and they run through the motions. They do a CT scan. They model in the computer what your whole prostate bed looks like. They look at where the bladder is. They look at where the rectum is, just to kind of line things up and make sure they know exactly where to kind of target everything. And then when you come back to actually start, the doctors will have gotten together, and it's never one doctor, it's usually a team. They look at the area and they collectively, they have consensus. What is the area exactly we should apply radiation to? And if you remember, there's things around there as well. So they don't want to damage too much of the surrounding area, but they do. But when you're actually going to go and receive the radiation itself, they want to make sure your bladder is out of the way. They want to make sure your rectum is out of the way as much as possible. Because if you just radiate that area, and let's say your bladder is not full, let's say your bladder is empty, well, the bladder will kind of sit like a pancake over the area they want to radiate, and the same thing with your rectum. It's in that area. So what they want to do is, through drinking a lot of water, they want the bladder full and they want the rectum empty. So there's a dance you do every morning where before you actually sit down in the radiation machine, they will do an ultrasound to see how much water is in your bladder. And what they told me to do is an hour before my scheduled treatment is to pee out as much as I can and presumably have an empty bladder, and then to drink 32 ounces of water. And in liters, someone has to help me in the comments. I think that's just under a liter. But anyway, they want you to drink that, and then within an hour, your body will bring the water into the bladder, and it will be held there. And then what they do is, with an ultrasound, they measure it. And if you have too much water in your bladder, they'll give you a cup, and they'll mark it with a line and say, okay, pee until this amount and the cup is there, and then we have your bladder exactly where we want it to be. They don't want it to be overfilled, so there's a certain number that they have. And as far as the rectum, you want to do your very best to make sure you stay regular. They don't want a lot of fecal material. Well, your bowel is ahead of the rectum, but they want you to be somewhat regular. And I mentioned in my last podcast, if they're doing their job, and I'm very adamant about this, then they should be inserting a balloon. They call it a balloon, but they insert, it's a balloon of sorts into your rectum. They fill it up with water. What that does is that expands. First of all, it pushes anything out of the rectum that could be in the way. And the balloon itself expands inside the rectum, and it creates a barrier. So if the radiation comes through, and you're missing most of the bladder, you're treating the prostate area or where the prostate was, and then you can't avoid hitting the rectum, but if the balloon is in place, it'll just catch one side of it and it won't actually damage the other side. So it really minimizes any damage to the rectum. The sessions themselves, when you go in, you will probably spend about 30 to 45 minutes from start to end. The radiation itself is about 10 minutes, but the setup, they put you in position. They really kind of don't want you to move. It helps if you take a sedative. If you're very nervous in MRIs or in CTs like I am, it's hard for me to sit still even when there's not much happening. So I'll, for the first little while, I take just a small amount of Xanax, and what that does is it just calms me down, but you're still alert. It's not like you're out of it. You're fully aware. You're talking, but that nervousness you have, it just takes the edge off. If I could have whiskey before, I would, but I don't think that's a wise thing to do when you're having this treatment. So speaking of MRIs and CTs, for those of you that are nervous about this big machinery around you, MRIs especially are very noisy, and I find that very disturbing. CTs are not so noisy, but when that thing starts spinning and you hear it, that's when I kind of get nervous. The great thing about radiation is, unlike, at the dentist, when they go behind the wall and they hit that button and you hear like, when you're getting radiation, they put you in the room, they step away, and you're not really aware anything is happening. You don't hear anything, you don't feel anything, and they come back in and they say, okay, let's do it. But in the meantime, the radiation machine moves around you. In my case, they're doing 3 positions, so they radiate from above, they come on either side, so other than that machine moving. But anyway, I'm managing to stay very still, and it's all fine. So as of time recording this is June 4th. I finished today my second session. I have 39 sessions in total. So this will be Monday to Friday for all of June, all of July, and that'll pretty much complete the 39 sessions. And if we do everything right, then this should be the very end of this journey, at least for me, being part of the cancer experience as a patient. And then I just resume talking to all of you about the disease itself and things I've learned and helped. So anyway, I will post updates as they're necessary, as things happen, but probably every 3 weeks or so, I'll just give you an update as to what's happening with radiation. They say that as you get more into it, on my second day, I couldn't tell you that anything has happened. I don't feel any differently, but they say as you get about the 4th week, you start to get tired a little bit more, so we'll see how that goes. So anyway, it's not the worst thing in the world, and I'm okay with it. So third part, I have recently in my Facebook group been seeing a lot of comments, a lot of men in fear, a lot of men that are headed into surgery or radiation. Back in the old days, when I started my Facebook channel, it was only about surgery because at the time, the technology was such that surgery was the best way to go. And there was that old saying, once you have radiation, you can't have surgery. And that's probably somewhat true, but the radiation methods have become so advanced that there are a lot of cases, and everyone's different, but there are a lot of cases where you can have radiation instead of your prostate removed in 2024, and it really increases your chances of success greatly. As a matter of fact, the CyberKnife, SBRT, can be a full treatment for prostate cancer in 5 sessions, which is amazing. It's not the perfect solution, but it's one that seems to be getting a lot of traction. But anyway, I don't want to necessarily talk about the surgery or radiation. What I do want to talk about is the emotional side effects and the potential side effects after surgery or treatment. Surgery is unfortunately going to be the greatest likelihood of side effects. And what the side effects are, and I think many of you know this that have been researching, is loss of erectile function and loss of continence. So because this very area and because the prostate itself is a key gland for both sexual and urinary function, when it's removed and cancerous, even dangerously cancerous, it tends to affect all of those things. Now, I do believe still, if you catch prostate cancer early enough, and by early enough, I would say that means no greater than a Gleason 7. More optimally, Gleason scores of 3 plus 4, although 4 plus 3 are still okay most of the time. I had some 4 plus 3s and I came out okay. If you're at a Gleason 8 or 9 or 10 or higher, the odds of you having permanent complications increase dramatically because the cancer at that point is getting a little more advanced and the surgery may be a little trickier. And sometimes it gets into your lymph nodes, etc. But what I thought I would do, and I wanted to dedicate a whole podcast on this, and maybe I still will, but while it's on my mind, I wanted to give some of you some food for thought in the event that you are afflicted with this disease, you have your treatment, your surgery, or even your radiation, and then you find afterwards you never get continence back and you never get erectile function back. And I want to preface this with saying, in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of men that I speak to, they do get full recovery at some point. Sometimes it's a few months later, sometimes it's a year long later, but at least it comes back in some form, if not fully. The only difference, in the best case scenario, you will have sexual function that comes back. It's just that your orgasms are dry. There's no secretion. And all of us are somewhere in between. Some people come out perfect, other people come out at other ends. But if your concern is what happens if I can never get an erection again, or what happens if I can never hold urine, so you're wearing diapers for the rest of your life because when your body's ready to get rid of urine, there's no control. It just sort of comes out. First thing I want to say about that is, if any of you are avoiding treatment for prostate cancer because you're afraid of the side effects, then you're doing yourself and your loved ones a big disservice. So, we can never control what happens to us. For those of you who follow religion, there certainly is a belief that, God has a plan for all of us and for all of you. And for one reason or another, this is the path that he has chosen for you. For those of you that are not religious and don't believe in God, then there is potentially a degree of fate. This was your fate, this was your destiny, or in other cases, just bad luck. Regardless of your belief as to what brought us all to prostate cancer and potentially the complications afterwards, the most important thing to always remember is that, there are different outcomes depending on the actions you take. So let's say you have a fear of losing sexual function and a fear of losing continence and just really opt to not do anything with it. The potential, and this depends on how old you are, how healthy you are, how advanced or not advanced your cancer is, but this cancer left unchecked, and if it moves quickly, will absolutely kill you. There's no question about it. A lot of these famous people that you see dying, O.J. Simpson just died from prostate cancer. It was advanced. He claims he got treatment, but from what I understand, it was late in the game. It was too late. You have to really nip this in the bud early. So up until a Gleason 7, if you treat yourself, if you have treatment, I should say, whether it's surgery, which is what I still recommend, or radiation, there's a really good chance that it will not just be eradicated, but forever. And if it's not eradicated forever and it comes back microscopically a little bit later on in life, it could be years or even decades, you won't die from it. There's always going to be a treatment for recurrence of prostate cancer, even if you have, like in my case, the surgery and then radiation, and if it still comes back later on, there are still methods to deal with it so that it doesn't effectively kill you. Now, nothing's a guarantee, but this is all about risk and probability and chances. So I want you to think, and I don't want to push my luck here in pushing too much on all of you, but if you are avoiding treatment for prostate cancer because of erectile function or continence, I would say it could be a death sentence for you. And if you have people in your life who love you and who depend on you and who you love, you owe it to them to do the very best you can to stay alive as long as you can. So if you are someone who unfortunately came out of the other side of surgery with all of those conditions or some of them, I want you to always have a perspective that, yes, and especially there are some people who chat with me who are very, very sexual. very sexual creatures, and they can no longer perform or have sex or enjoy the life that is so important to them. And that's a big deal for them. With that being said, no matter what happens to you, you have your eyes, you have your ears, you can taste things, you can walk, you have your limbs, you can exercise, you can travel, your ability to love somebody, maybe not sexually. Well, I shouldn't say maybe not sexually, but your ability to love another human being does not diminish. If anything, it gets stronger. It really gives you that perspective. Sexually, if you can't get an erection and you can't satisfy your partner, then you've just got to figure out other ways to have enjoyment. It isn't the end of the world. For some of you, you may feel it is, but I promise you, the will to survive, the will to stay alive as long as possible is very strong. And when you're faced with these challenges, they're going to become very strong. So you may not think, and you certainly may be, under the impression that this is the end of it. I can't say I know of people who have become suicidal because of these conditions, but there may be times where you feel that that's it. Especially, if you're alone and don't have family and don't have anyone that, you love or loves you at that point in time, you might wonder, what's there to live for? You've lost these. But there's many things to live for. Life is a great and precious thing, despite us living in a crazy world. And I just, I wish politics didn't kind of lead sort of how a lot of people think about the world and each other, but it does. So putting politics aside, always focusing what's great about the life you live and the world we live in is a way to kind of stay forward. But anyway, so I would recommend, if you are someone that just never recovered, so you got rid of the cancer, that was maybe the easy part, but the life that you led before, where you could just go anywhere without diapers or get intimate, without worry about erectile function, it may be a new world, a new life. And I think the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of men who recover from the disease with different outcomes generally are okay with it, but a lot aren't. And I have noticed a lot of chatter in the Facebook group of people that they've just basically given up and they're angry. And, there's no one to blame. It's fate, or it's God's will, or it's the luck of the draw, but it shouldn't be what defines you. And always take a step back and don't think about what you've lost. Think about what you have and what needs to be, in your mind, kind of a source of pleasure and enjoyment for the many years that are left. The greatest outcome of getting treatment for prostate cancer is that your normal life will be realized. It's not going to be cut short. If you get early treatment, you will live. You will live until the day that you were supposed to. And ultimately, when you do move on to this other great place in the sky, or whatever your belief system is, it won't be because of prostate cancer. You may die with some remnants of prostate cancer. As a matter of fact, I have to find the statistics somewhere, but they say the vast majority of men who are elderly, let's say 70 and above, actually 70 isn't really elderly, but let's just use 70 as a number, that have not been diagnosed will have some form of prostate cancer developing, but they'll die of something else. So a couple of great things about prostate cancer: it's one of the few cancers that's fully curable. If you treat it properly, it's fully curable, unlike others. And another thing, it's very slow growing. And for those of you that may be looking at recurrence, here's the funny thing. So you hear of something called doubling time. When your PSA after surgery or after radiation for prostate cancer, the original, should be undetectable. If it starts rising in value and it hits 0.1, that's sort of a yellow flag. A rising PSA does not always mean prostate cancer. There's a lot of different things that it can mean. But if it keeps rising, and if the rate that it rises is quick, so that what they call doubling time, if it goes from 0.1 to 0.2 within a matter of months, they'll want to test a few more times, because at point 2, they do believe that there's some type of biochemical recurrence. And you hear that a lot, biochemical recurrence. We tend to understand that as meaning prostate cancer has returned. You hear biochemical recurrence, prostate cancer has returned. That's actually not what it means. What a biochemical recurrence means is that the PSA, the prostate-specific androgen, has shown itself in a test. And at that point, it's microscopic. It's not a tumor. It hasn't moved around. But when there's a biochemical recurrence, the potential is for it to grow into prostate cancer once again and to perhaps move around the body. And prostate cancer on a recurrence loves to hit the bones. It loves bones. So you don't want to get to that point. So that's why what they say is at a biochemical recurrence, I'm at point 4. I went from point 2 to point 4 in 3 years. That's really slow. There's a chance I could have waited 5 years, 10 years, and nothing more would have happened. It's quite possible. But because the recurrence is there, the biochemical, there's no tumors at this point. There's no prostate cancer developed, but the androgens are there, which are, hungry, and I have very high testosterone as it is. So the chances are it would turn back into prostate cancer at some point. So that's how we wipe it out. So anyway, I'm just jumping on a lot of different directions here. And I don't want this to continue for too much longer. I'm in this beautiful hotel room. This is not my usual studio, but with as good lighting as I can and not my usual camera system, I just thought I would put something together for you. If any of you have questions about anything that I've mentioned, and I covered a lot of things today, do go ahead and make some comments below. I try to answer as much as I can. I get a lot of people reaching out to me and commenting, and I'm still working full time. So if there's a point where I dedicate my life completely to volunteering to help others with prostate cancer, I'll have a lot more responses and a lot more elaborate responses. But for now, if you do make a comment, and I try to read as much as I can. At the very minimum, I'll give it a thumbs up to let you know that I've read it. But on other occasions, I will leave a comment and respond as well. So I'm looking forward to continuing to help share with you my own experience. And, my case may be unique to my body and who I am. But, my parting words are, don't let this disease be the end of you. It's very easy to treat. And if it comes back, you do exactly what I'm doing. You do a second round of treatment. You hope for the best. And if that doesn't work, which it should, the second time around, the vast majority of times they get it and they get it right. But if you treat it, you will stay alive. Almost guaranteed. Nothing's a full guarantee, but because you're treating it, they're following it and they're able to treat it. So I thank all of you for joining in, and from beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee, which I have not really shown anything of yet. That's it for this episode. I look forward to catching up with as many of you as possible sometime soon. Thanks, guys.